those individuals now that are starting to think our way may, be more energized and say, hey, maybe we have a chance to change the system and reject this idea that government should own everything and that socialism is the answer.
Well, Ron, you're exactly right. And back in 1929 and the early 1930s, in this country there was Benjamin Anderson, there was Hazlitt, there was Garrett Garrett. That was about it. I mean, virtually nobody understood what the heck was happening. Today, thanks to you and thanks to all the great economists that you've mentioned, there's a vast opposition among the people, especially among young people. I mean, again, as you say, I saw it during your campaign when you would see kids spontaneously cheering to end the Fed, end the Fed. So there's no question there's vastly more interest in these ideas, vastly more skepticism. And I think it's, as the point you made earlier, that it strikes more and more Americans that what's in the interest of the government and its related elites, that is nationalization, inflation, and all these things, is not only, not in the interest of the American people, it's actively opposed to the interest of the American people. So while the government does well from all these policies, we're being hurt. And, I think there's coming tax revolts. I think there's a growing anger among Americans about what is obviously a ripoff, all these bailouts just ripping off of the average person for the elites. And so I agree with you. And, you're the man who lit the prairie fire, and everybody who believes in freedom and sound money, the principles that are essential to a civilized society, owes you a huge debt of gratitude.
Well, a lot of people have been involved, but I do sense that this is what's happening. And fortunately, we have many more allies than we've ever had before. And when this time comes, the people who we assume are in charge, the establishment, the elite, and some people claim that there's an all-powerful conspiracy. Well, a lot of that goes on, and they do plan, and they do connive, and they are the insiders. But I am not convinced that they have as much control as some people believe. I think ultimately, like what's going on now, I don't think they, all of a sudden, hey, you know what we're going to do? We're going to rearrange all this wealth, and we're going to bring on this crisis. I think they are not exactly happy how devastating this is. I mean, when you see billions and billions of dollars being wiped off the table of many who we consider are the insiders, I mean, this has gotten pretty big. But the concern is those who are in charge are going to work the system to the very end, even though they might be losing control. In one sense, and it's getting out of hand, they also have control of the printing press and the appropriations. And when you see these tens of billions of dollars going into the banks, and they don't have to tell us where they're going, and the Federal Reserve can create $2 trillion, and they tell us, Bernanke says, well, I don't have to tell you that where that money goes because that would be counterproductive. So they'll keep struggling, but at the same time, I think they're sort of panicking a little bit too, and they can't maintain wealth out of paper. Ultimately, people who hold hard assets are the ones who will be protected.
And Ron, you're right. There are people who, of course, think this is all brought on deliberately for reasons of state growth and world government and that sort of thing. But not only is that not true from the standpoint of the actual facts of the situation, but they are, you're right, they're unhappy. This is very destabilizing to the regime. That's why they don't like this sort of thing. And because it is destabilizing to the regime, it's actually an opening for all of us who would like to see the regime changed, who would like to see a return to sound policies, to any kind of cutback in the government, less military intervention overseas. You're always talking about you've got to cut spending, and how about cutting it overseas first? Yet, of course, the government's going in the opposite direction. But I think the American people are beginning to move intellectually away from the government. So this is a huge opportunity for all of us over these next few years. As bad as the economy is going to be, we have to point out those who are responsible for the suffering. We have to point out who's been profiting from the rip-offs in Washington, and we have to point out what the answer is, that we don't have to be stuck with this. We don't need to have these kinds of destructive policies.
All right. I've seen some subtle changes even in Washington with those who have been there for a while. and that is the members of Congress. They are now more interested in asking me a serious question than they have been in the past. They do ask me now, when am I going to start up my little weekly meetings? And we've helped a few individuals, keep their seat and come back. And they are so disenchanted with their leadership, especially the Republican leadership. Before it was, I get to go on this committee and I get to be a chairman. I got to do their bidding. I got to do what the speaker says, and I got to do what I have to do what the president wants in order to get ahead. Now they're not ahead at all. So for practical reasons, as well as the fact that the economy is in such shambles, they are more open to what we're doing, and I find that pretty encouraging.
Well, it is encouraging, and I certainly see it among young people, as do you, that there's the scales are falling from people's eyes. People are not believing, just as certainly no American believed in the bailout, in that initial TARP bailout. Nobody outside of the elites and their connected media. So this undermines them. Like you, I'm actually optimistic about the future in terms of intellectual change, as tough as these next few years are going to be. So maybe we don't ever have to go through this kind of disaster again if we listen to the Austrian economist and we listen to Ron Paul.
Well, let's hope we're right on our optimism. But, there are days when a lot of our allies get pretty downhearted. But, generally those who have joined us in our Campaign for Liberty group, they tend to be pretty optimistic, and they want to be involved, and they're just so excited. I had somebody yesterday drive 50 miles from Houston down to my office here in the Lake Jackson area. Just came down on the chance he might see me because he is so fascinated with it. He was a young guy, and he had a technical question about the Constitution, and he was in an argument with somebody else about where the president gets the power to do these things without the explicit authorization from the Congress. But he's not alone. There's a lot of people like that, and all of a sudden decided, well, maybe the Constitution is imperfect. But, let him to get away with murder, almost literally, is a lot worse than trying to hold them to the rule of law that we're supposed to. So, but the young people have responded favorably, not only on that, but on monetary policy. And I think the conservatives over the years have made a mistake by appealing to young people, and that is that they talk a little bit about economic liberty, but they never could tie it into personal liberty and personal choices. And this is one thing I think that the Republican Party has made a serious mistake on, and not that I needed any more attention or I had the answers, but they might have asked, why do the young people come to your rallies? They never did that. And the leadership, of course, did everything they could to exclude me and ignore me and all these things. But individual members of Congress and grassroots individuals, they would come. But I think it's fascinating. That's probably encouraged me as much as anything, that young people like the entire message, that the young people, they don't want to take on more wars. They don't want to take on more debt. They know Social Security is broken, and they like the idea that they can make choices. And even at these college rallies, when I said, you know what this means? That means you're responsible for all your mistakes. And if you mess up, you can't come crawling to the government and to your neighbor to be bailed out. And they like that, too. But they are also theirs who like the idea that they could, run their personal lives, whether it's their social life, their sexual lives, their religious lives, or whatever, without any monitoring, that they would get to make their decisions. But this idea, I think I was so pleased with, was that they had to assume responsibility for their acts. And this is the reason I came away, after investing another year and a half or so, more encouraged with the way the young people will respond to this message when they hear it.
Ron, you're the author of many important books, of course, The Pillars of Prosperity, The Foreign Policy of Freedom, the best-selling The Revolution, a Manifesto. But now, of course, I don't want to get into areas I shouldn't be getting into, but I hear tell that you've got another bestseller up your sleeve.
Well, that remains to be seen. I've been always wanting to do something about the Federal Reserve. And I have been working on that, and maybe we can hear more about that in the near future.
Well, magnificent. That's the locus of the problem. Without the central bank, we wouldn't have been able to have the warfare state, the welfare state, the vast growth in government, and the horrors of the 20th century. So that's exactly what needs to be addressed, and you're the man to do it. So, Ron Paul, we look forward to that. Thanks very much for coming on the show. Always an honor to have you.
Good to be with you, Lew.
You've been